of the information industry for over 11 years. She joined PCG, the sales and marketing consulting firm, in 2005 after working for 5 years with the collection development team at the University of Massachusetts Boston Library. She's now working closely with over 100 publishers to implement marketing campaigns designed to increase retention and grow institutional subscriptions. Recently, she has conducted studies on librarians' attitudes towards ebooks and has co-authored chapters on ebook standards and patron-driven acquisition.
Well, thank you, Tim, for inviting me. It's certainly been a very good day so far. So I'm going to attempt to give you a broad overview of patron-driven acquisitions and try to see how it can create some opportunities for everyone. So yes, today I'll give you an overview of patron-driven, and then we'll look at some opportunities and some of the challenges that it actually gives to publishers and libraries alike. And then we'll talk about some of the implications moving forward. I'll also just mention that for the last part, I will ask a lot of questions, and I told Tim I didn't have all the answers, and he was okay with that. So I will just try and challenge everyone, and I'm definitely happy to hear your opinion and all that. So what is patron-driven acquisition? I'm sure you've heard about it. You've heard about PDA. It's also referred to as demand-driven acquisitions, as user-driven acquisitions. If you've been to ALA or Charleston or even UKSG in the last 2 years, it's certainly been quite a buzzword. So I tried to sum it up with this graph. At the beginning, it's really a collection of content that is hosted at the moment by aggregators. Right now, the big 4 players, I would say, are EBL, MyLibrary, NetLibrary, which is now part of EBSCO, and eBury, which is also now part of ProQuest. So those 4 aggregators, other people are doing it as well, but I'll get into that a little bit later. They basically, right now, offer collections of books. Then they offer that to libraries. Libraries then in turn set up a profile for their own institution. The profile is really a way to limit the number of books that will be available to end users. So the profile can be based on several criteria. You can, for example, limit the publishers you work with, or rather the publishers you open your collection to. You can you can limit the price level also of each book that you want to include in your collection. You can set it up to remove the books that you already currently have in your own catalog, either in print or online. And you can also limit the subject areas that you include in your catalog. So you set up your profile based on all those criteria. That will determine the mark records that you can then upload in your catalog, so that the end users can do a search and access those books through your library catalog. The aggregator provides those mark records, and the library loads them up in their catalog. The library also determines some trigger points that will actually determine when a book is actually purchased. The trigger points can be based on the number of things. They can be based on the number of uses, number of views, at the chapter level. Usually you can browse a book. You can look at the abstract before it constitutes a use. So the library will negotiate with the vendor what determines a trigger point and at which point the book will be actually purchased. Once the trigger point has been reached, then the book becomes completely part of the library collection, and the vendor will generate an invoice for the library. In the background, the librarian also will determine a budget for this. Right now in the US, it's been a lot of experimenting with the program, and we've heard from a lot of libraries that they're trying with a certain amount, a very limited amount of money to see how the program will work out. I've heard some institutions putting aside $30,000, sometimes they go as far as $50,000, but it's still very much at the experiment stages. Then everything is open in the catalog, and the users are just actually everything is transparent, so the users are not seeing any of this in the background. As the budget is used up, then the vendor and the librarians review what books were purchased, how often they were used, what subject areas they were in, if they matched actually what the libraries wanted in the first place, or would have selected in the first place. And they just review whether it's worthwhile for them and whether it is indeed expanding their collection in the way that they want it to be. And they either decide to just drop the program, which we don't hear that very often. They tend to either replicate it by tweaking the profile, or actually expand it to include more subject areas, or just to put more money in their budget for it. So where is it really being used? Because we certainly hear about it a lot in the US. It actually started in Colorado in 1999. That was the first program that we could find on record. And it was an experiment between a consortium actually in Colorado. They decided to make all their books, they worked with Net Library at the time, and they decided to make all the books available to everyone within the consortium. At the time, the trigger point, I think, was the students could have one complimentary view, and then the second view would trigger a purchase. So you can imagine that they ended up buying a whole lot of books very quickly. This was back in '99, so really it was a first try. The program lasted for a few years, and then members just started dropping off, and they stopped after a little while. But that said, the idea didn't go away. So EBL comes from ebooks.com and happens to be based in Australia. And they work with a lot of libraries there, and the idea really picked up there. And Australian librarians absolutely loved it. And it's very much used there, completely integrated in their catalogs, in their collection development policies, and extremely popular there, very mature. In the US, I would say in the last 3 years, it's boomed. A lot of libraries are still experimenting with it, but generally they keep on trying. They keep on trying different things. So there is still some hesitation, but we're definitely looking at more and more institutions trying it. And of all sizes. Large libraries like it because it gives them a chance to experiment a little bit, and smaller libraries like it because it gives them an opportunity to open up their catalog to so many different publications they wouldn't otherwise have. And they get to control their spending in a way as well. In the UK, I would say in the last year and change, more and more librarians are actually experimenting with it. And it's going okay. There's a little bit more resistance there, but they're still experimenting. Another interesting region is the Middle East, and it's really because a lot of some European and American universities are opening branches there, and librarians there just find it a really good way to build a new collection by buying only what users actually need or want. And it also gives them access to a lot of books right away. So all the vendors are reporting just really a lot of interest from the Middle East, and librarians love it there. Europeans, they're looking at it right now. We think it will be the next step, but they're quite hesitant. I think culturally also they're still starting to get used to the idea of ebooks, and the idea of losing some control, I'll get into that a little bit later, but the idea of losing some control over the collection development strategies is probably making them a little bit more nervous. So they're looking at it, and we'll keep an eye on it to see how it develops there. So this new model really creates some new opportunities for both publishers and libraries, and users. as I mentioned, this process is completely seamless to the users. They don't actually see any of it. But for libraries, it does give them access to additional content that they wouldn't otherwise have access to necessarily. And also, when they upload those MARC records, it's generally to a very large number of books. Mainly, it also gives them guaranteed use, because really, you only buy the books that your users are reading, or at least are browsing, which is another probably pitfall of the model right now. But it does provide some really good ROI figures for the administration, and it does guarantee that the books that you have in your collection have been actually used. I'm sure you've heard also of some studies that have come around in the last few years about print book collections and how often they're actually used. Some universities report that 40% of the books they buy in print are never checked out, never read by students, and 40% are checked out or read less than 3 times. So with this model, at least, everything you buy is actually used. It gives librarians just a chance to experiment, to try and play around with their profile, to see if it's something that can work really well in medicine, or that can work really well for computer science. Gives them a chance to also see exactly what their users actually want, and does it really match what book selectors would otherwise choose for that collection. And it is a tool for future collections. In a way, it gives them a lot of data to see what works and what students are indeed using. For publishers, it gives them more exposure to potentially otherwise unnoticed titles. As long as it fits the criteria that the librarian set, it's no longer one journal one book in a catalog for the librarians to review. It's really one that fits their subject area of interest, and it just gives them exposure through the catalog to many more students. And it does give them a deeper reach into new markets as well. Some of the vendors are working with institutions that the book publisher wouldn't necessarily work with, and it gives them also access to more students that the publisher itself couldn't necessarily access either. In new countries as well. And just like for librarians, I think it gives them a tool for their future collection. It gives them some data on, again, what users want. It's just a good indication of how their books are used as well. It does offer some challenges for both libraries and publishers. I don't think there are too many challenges for users, but certainly on the library side and the publisher side. Libraries report that it is difficult for them to control their spending. They do determine how much money they're going to invest in the program, but it's not easy for them to predict how quickly that money will be used up. So I think it's a big part of the experimentation now, and it's a big part of why some libraries are dragging their feet a bit, is really trying to find a balance of how much money I put in the program, and is it really going to last for a year, for example. So some data is coming out about that. I think we're a little bit too early in the process to have a good way of predicting those patterns, but there are definitely some talks around different shows of institutions that are looking at this very, very carefully. So previously, right now, a lot of libraries have approval plans in place with their vendors to determine which books they want to receive. Right now, PDA programs do sometimes integrate with approval plans, but it's very much still there. Everybody's very much still experimenting with that. And it creates some issues when you end up with 2 copies of the same book, for example, or when you end up with a print copy coming automatically in 6 weeks, for example, where your student has already purchased the e-copy because it was available in your catalog. So it does create some potential problems there. Yes, also maintaining the quality of the collection. I think an example has been cited quite a few times, the banana example. I think it was the University of Denver. The faculty give students an assignment on banana, and I think it was an economics assignment. But the point was that there were a lot of books available in the library catalog if you typed up the keyword banana. And within a few days, the library owned pretty much every single book ever published on bananas. And that gave them a wide range of things on bananas that they didn't necessarily need for their papers. So certainly, it is a challenge. Libraries are very careful. There are some mechanisms in place so that a librarian can actually approve every purchase before it, at the trigger point, before it actually is purchased. So there are some things in place to do that. And I think it is important for libraries as well to make sure that they do maintain a collection that's academic, but also in line with their mission. That's another one, and I think it's a big one in Europe particularly. It does take away from the traditional book selector's role. A big part of their role is to make sure that students have access to the best research. And right now we're telling them, you know what, we let the students decide whether it's the research they need. It's a shift in their perception, and there's certainly some resistance in a way. So I think it is shifting over time, but certainly one internal challenge that we hear quite a bit from librarians. So for publishers, I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with those challenges as soon as there is a new channel, but it's basically less control over sales, delivery channels, marketing, the hosting platform. I think right now, the fact that mainly four aggregators are actually selling book content, making that model available, does limit options and does limit access to end users in a way, and the way you want to communicate with your end users. And that's something I would let James really address in his next talk. But for both, it's relying a lot on metadata and search accuracy. So it will be, you do need students to type up the right keywords in order to have access to the right books. So what's next? There comes a question for it. Sorry. All right. So right now it's a lot. It's mainly with books. I think librarians are interested in looking at journals for that model as well. I know some publishers are experimenting by opening their collection to, or making it more open than they have in the past. Some publishers are also experimenting with some usage-based pricing models for journals. So that's an interesting twist, and that should open up quite a few opportunities for libraries. I think publishers, I can see how it can be difficult to track. One of my questions is it happening right now because libraries just have so many cuts that they have to find other ways around the economic crisis? Is it really just a temporary fix, and is the momentum going to last? Today it seems like the momentum is picking up, but again, it might just be a temporary fix. Is it an opportunity for publishers to publish even better content? Because really now there's just so much data about what users want and what users are buying that it's really an opportunity to fine-tune what the next hot topics are. And then really, is it a complete substitute? Is it going to take over all the book and journal acquisition process? Or is it just a supplement? In a way, will it be just a portion of the book budget that will be allocated towards patron-driven purchases, or will it indeed take over the whole budget? Again, no real answer there. We know that funds are tight. We know that a lot of librarians are shifting their money from books to journals. So is it a way to open up their collection to more titles, but controlling their spending in a way that's possible? And then the other big question that comes up often is it something that can work at a consortium level? Is it even manageable? Does it make sense? And then is it really the role of the consortium? What is nice about having an individual library is that it does meet the mission of the institution and what really students need. If you open up at the consortium level, you end up having just a very general collection for everyone within the consortium, and so you lose some of that specificity. So I think we can wrap up now, but I'm more than happy to hear more questions and some answers to my own questions, actually. If anybody has any experience with it.